about what he's going to do in the future. And I'll center on one point. The policy of this administration on putting people on the no-fly list before this incident was so strict that even the fact that this man's father, went in to see a CIA agent in Nigeria and said that my son is a potential terrorist or an extremist was not sufficient to put him on the no-fly list. As I heard the President of the United States today, in the future it will be. And that is exactly right. And the other steps that he took, the other security measures that he took, I think were right as well. They were, however, mostly defensive, and you're never going to be successful defensively 100% of the time. The things I wish he had said, and that I hope that he goes ahead and says in the future, is that we are not going to treat people like this as though they were an ordinary criminal defendant. We now have the ability to treat them as enemy combatants and question them for an extended period of time. This guy gave us a lot of information in a few hours, and then he was charged, and then he got a lawyer, and then he clammed up. And the President's security advisor, Mr. Brennan, on one of his news programs on Sunday, even implied, well, if we want to get more out of him, maybe there'll be a plea agreement. Plea agreement with this guy? No way. We should have treated him, and we should treat these people in the future as enemy combatants and question them and get all of the information we can out of them. Because it's much more important to find out who started this, where he got the explosives that he was using, who inspired him to do it, than it was to charge him right now. We've got him. We've got him as far as that's concerned. So I wish the president had gone beyond that. And secondly, bluntly, I have to say it's time for a bit of profiling. We know that the great majority of these people are young Muslim males from about a dozen countries in the Middle East and Africa. And it's time to just say all such people are going to go through secondary screening before they get on an airplane.
And yet Al-Qaeda has become very sophisticated in adapting to our changes, so isn't it then likely they would then move to female and perhaps not Muslim?
I have, well, it's very unlikely that they're going to move to non-Muslims because there are not very many of them who are suicidal on behalf of Al-Qaeda by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, whatever we do, they're going to try to adapt to it. But the point is that if we're taking defensive mechanisms that can be effective 90% of the time rather than 20% of the time, we have to do so.
Senator Travis Mayfield is joining us in the studio, and he has a question for you.
Senator, when we talked before, you talked a lot about how the president and the entire administration needed more urgency when it came to dealing with the war on terror, dealing with terror suspects, dealing with foreign policy in general. You even said you needed to hear him call this a war and acknowledge that we were at war. He seems to do that.
And he did today. I was very gratified that we aren't getting circumlocutions anymore, and that was a very positive part of what the president had to say. One of the ironies I find in all of this is, looking back on the politics now, is particularly former Vice President Cheney and the president, they're always sniping at one another. And yet, those two administrations did the same thing in the beginning. The Bush administration, up until 9/11, just didn't pay enough attention to this. It wasn't a high enough priority. The Obama administration, up until this incident, just didn't pay enough attention to it. It wasn't a higher priority. Each of them reacted decisively later. And I want to say, I think the president's reaction today was decisive. I hope it goes further, but it was a very good one.
Senator, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just one quick follow-up question. You heard that from the president, but then did you hear that urgency translated to Secretary Napolitano and the rest of the administration?
Well, we had a long briefing afterwards by Mr. Brennan, who's one of the president's national security advisors, and who's the very one who said that if we needed more out of this particular defendant, he even considered there might possibly be a plea agreement. I thought that was awful. Now, he didn't say that today. And Secretary Napolitano wasn't nearly as precise as the president was in saying that we are going to have a tougher standard now. We're going to put these people on these lists an awful lot faster. So I liked what the president had to say very, very much. I had some reservations about what the two people who worked for him had to say.
Although she did say it's going to be easier to put people on her
She
list.
did.
Okay.
She did, but she wasn't as precise as the president
Right.
was.
I have one question for you in context. You were on the 9/11 Commission, and John Brennan, the Deputy National Security Advisor at the news conference, said that this was different than 9/11. He said it wasn't a failure to collect or share information. We had the information we needed. We didn't put it together. Do you agree with that? Was that the failure here, that they got it and they didn't know what to do with it?
I do agree with him. The actual collection and distribution of intelligence is done better now. I think partly as a result of what we did on the 9/11 Commission, and partly as a result of our experience. This wasn't put together, but part of the reason it wasn't put together was that they still had rules that required too much to be done before you could do something decisively about a guy like this. And that's why I just come back to liking what the president had to say, because I think the president now said that's going to change.
And Senator Gorton, finally, I guess I'd like you to take off your 9/11 Commission status at the moment and talk as an American citizen. Did what you hear today, and should American citizens feel safer because of this?
American citizens should believe that the president is reacting properly at this point. Things don't change overnight by any means, but the president now, it seems to me, is paying the proper degree of attention to a very, very real challenge to our security.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Slade Gorton, former member of the 9/11 Commission, reacting to all the news out of Washington, D.C. today. Como News Time is 3:13. We will check your traffic next.